Get your filthy hands away from him! The scream shattered the silence of the sterile white hallway. Nia froze, her grip tightening on the tray of organic fertilizers, but it wasn't the dirt on the tray that Mrs. Victoria was staring at with such undisguised disgust. It was Nia's hand. Her dark skin against the pristine, hospital-grade white doorframe seemed to offend the older woman more than any mud ever could. Victoria stood like a gatekeeper to heaven, dressed in a silk suit so white it hurt to look at, blocking the view into the dim room behind her. She slipped on a pair of fresh white cotton gloves before she even dared to push Nia's shoulder back. "Do not let that skin touch my son," Victoria hissed, her voice low and venomous, echoing off the marble floors. "Julian has a delicate condition. He is allergic to impurities. And look at you. You are walking pollution." Nia swallowed the lump of rage rising in her throat. She needed this paycheck. She needed to pay off the student loans for a master's degree in botany that nobody cared about because the face on her ID didn't match the prestige of the diploma. "I was just bringing the indoor plants, ma'am," Nia said, keeping her voice steady, though her knuckles were white from gripping the tray. "The agency said the young master likes nature." "Nature belongs outside," Victoria snapped, pointing a gloved finger toward the heavy oak doors at the end of the hall. "And so do you. If I see you near his room again, I won't just fire you. I will call the police and tell them I found you stealing silver. Do you understand me?" Nia nodded, lowering her gaze not out of submission, but to hide the fire in her eyes. She turned around, walking away from the heavy door, but just before she rounded the corner, she heard the click of a lock turning. 3 times. It wasn't just a bedroom. It was a vault. 10 minutes later, Nia was on her knees in the scorching midday sun, digging her trowel into the dry earth of the estate's west garden. The heat was oppressive, but it was better than the freezing judgment inside the mansion. She wiped sweat from her forehead, leaving a streak of loam on her temple. She looked up at the towering window on the second floor. The glass was tinted black, reflecting the sun like a shield. Behind that glass lived Julian, the billionaire's son, the boy the tabloids called the Vampire Prince. Rumor had it a single ray of sunlight would blister his skin like acid. But as Nia looked down at the flower bed directly beneath his window, her botanist instincts screamed that something was wrong. The roses here were dead. They hadn't just wilted from the heat. The stems were black and shriveled, twisted as if they had been tortured. Nia pulled a pair of tweezers from her pocket, her movements precise and clinical. She plucked a blackened leaf and held it up to the light. The veins were ruptured. This wasn't dehydration, this was chemical burn. "Hey, you!" Nia flinched as a shadow fell over her. Mrs. Victoria was standing on the patio holding a glass of iced lemonade that sweated in the heat. She didn't offer a drink. Instead, she crumpled a $5 bill and tossed it onto the grass near Nia's muddy boots. "You did a passable job trimming the hedges," Victoria said, not bothering to look Nia in the eye. "Go buy yourself a soda and wash your face. You look like you've been rolling in the dirt." Nia stared at the crumpled money. It was a tip given to a beggar, not payment for a professional. She picked it up slowly, her mind racing. Victoria treated the plants with more care than she treated people, yet right here, under her beloved son's window, the soil was toxic. As Victoria turned to leave, Nia noticed something that made her breath hitch. The wind shifted, carrying a scent from the open patio door. It was faint, masked by expensive perfume, but Nia's trained nose caught it instantly. Bergamot. Concentrated synthetic bergamot oil. In the world of botany, bergamot was harmless in tea. But on skin? It was a photosensitizer. It reacted with sunlight to cause severe burns. Nia looked back up at the black window. The pieces of a terrifying puzzle were starting to click into place. The boy wasn't born allergic to the sun. Someone was making him that way. This revelation changes everything. Before we see who is watching from that window, I want to ask, where in the world are you listening to this story from? Drop your flag in the comments below. And if you are rooting for Nia to expose this injustice, please hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the ending. Suddenly, the black curtains on the second floor twitched, a pale face pressed against the glass. It was Julian. Even from this distance, Nia could see his eyes. They were wide, terrified, and fixed directly on her. But he wasn't looking at her like a gardener. He was looking at her like she was the monster his mother warned him about. He mouthed something against the glass, his breath fogging the pain. Nia squinted, reading his lips. Go away. He was scared of her. He thought she was the danger. Nia gripped her trowel, the realization hitting her harder than the heat. He didn't know he was the prisoner. And he didn't know his jailer was the woman currently sipping lemonade on the patio. Nia looked at the dead leaf in her hand, then at the chemical burn on the stem. She needed proof. Real proof. And she knew exactly where to find it. The opportunity didn't come until dusk, when the sky turned the color of a bruised plum. Nia crouched behind the row of manicured hedges near the service entrance. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She wasn't a thief. She was a scientist. But in this house, the line between curiosity and crime was razor thin. And for someone with her complexion, crossing it meant handcuffs, not a hearing. 10 feet away, the estate's private nurse, a woman with a face as pinched as a dried lemon, stepped out the back door. She carried a clear plastic bag filled with medical waste. Inside, nestled among used gauze and syringe wrappers, sat the object of Nia's obsession. The empty jar of Royal Dermal Shield. The nurse marched to the large silver biohazard bin, unlocked it with a key attached to her belt, and tossed the bag inside. The metal lid clanged shut with the finality of a prison door. She turned the key, checked it twice, and marched back inside. Nia checked her watch. The security patrol passed this spot every 15 minutes. She had exactly 4 minutes left. She sprinted across the gravel, the sound of her boots masked by the humming of the central air conditioning unit. She didn't have a key, but she had something better, a gardener's knowledge of leverage. She jammed her thin steel weeding tool into the gap of the hinge. One slip, one scratch on the metal, and she'd be explaining herself to the police. Nia gritted her teeth and leaned her entire body weight onto the tool. Metal groaned, a sound that seemed deafening in the silence. She froze, eyes darting to the security camera slowly panning toward her. 3 seconds. 2. Pop! The hinge gave way just enough. Nia shoved her hand into the dark, cold belly of the bin. Her fingers brushed against sticky medical tape, cold plastic, and then smooth, heavy glass. She grabbed it, yanked her arm out, and rolled back into the shadows of the hedges just as the camera's red eyes swept over the spot where she had been standing. Safe. For now. Nia didn't dare breathe until she was back in the potting shed at the far edge of the estate. It was a small, dusty shack filled with bags of fertilizer and rusty tools, but tonight, it was her laboratory. She cleared a space on the workbench, sweeping aside soil and dead leaves. She placed the jar in the center under the harsh glow of a portable UV grow lamp, the kind used to simulate sunlight for seedlings. The jar was beautiful, deep sapphire glass with gold lettering, for sensitive royal skin. Nia unscrewed the lid. There was just a smear of cream left at the bottom, pearlescent and smelling of that sickly sweet bergamot. It was time for the truth. Nia pulled a fresh, vibrant sunflower leaf from a pot she kept in the corner. She placed it on the table. Then she did something dangerous. She rolled up her sleeve. She looked at her own arm. Dark, rich mahogany skin. The skin that Mrs. Victoria looked at with such disdain. The skin that the world told her was less than. But biologically, Nia knew the truth. Her melanin was a shield. It was nature's armor against UV radiation. If this cream was toxic, her skin would be the ultimate control group. She dipped her finger into the jar. The cream felt cool and silky. Nia smeared a thick layer onto the green surface of the sunflower leaf. Then, taking a deep breath, she rubbed the remaining residue onto the inside of her own forearm. Step 1. Application. Step 2. Activation. She switched on the high-intensity UV lamp, focusing the purple beam directly onto the table. "Come on," she whispered, the seconds ticking by like hours. "Show me what you are." For the first 30 seconds, nothing happened. The shed was silent, save for the buzzing of the lamp. Doubt began to creep into Nia's mind. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe she was just a paranoid gardener imagining conspiracies to make herself feel important. Then, the smell hit her. It wasn't the sweet smell of flowers. It was the acrid, biting scent of ozone and scorching organic matter. On the table, the sunflower leaf began to hiss. Nia leaned in, her eyes widening. The green surface where she had applied the cream was bubbling. It was as if invisible acid was eating through the cellular structure. The vibrant green turned to a sickly yellow, then a crisp, dead brown. In less than a minute, the leaf curled up and crumbled into ash. A sharp sting on her arm made her gasp. Nia looked down. The patch of skin on her forearm was angry and red. Even through her high levels of melanin, protection that Julian didn't have, the skin was hot to the touch, blistering slightly. She snatched her arm away from the light, grabbing a rag to frantically wipe the cream off. Her heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. If this stuff could burn her skin in 2 minutes, imagine what it was doing to a pale, defenseless boy who had been slathered in it every single morning for 10 years. Mrs. Victoria wasn't protecting her stepson, she was marinating him. She was coating him in an accelerant and telling him the sun was the weapon, when all along, she was the one handing him the gasoline. Nia stared at the jar, the gold letters gleaming innocently under the lamp. This wasn't medicine. It was a slow-motion murder weapon. And now Nia had her fingerprints all over it. A sudden noise outside made her freeze. The crunch of boots on gravel. Heavy, deliberate. Not the rhythmic patrol of a guard, but the slow, searching steps of someone who knew someone was there. Nia killed the light, plunging the shed into darkness. She clutched the jar to her chest, pressing her back against the cold wooden wall. "I saw a light," a deep voice grumbled outside. "Check the shed." The doorknob rattled. Nia looked around frantically. There was no back exit, just a small, high window covered in grime. If they found her here, with stolen medical waste and a stolen jar, Mrs. Victoria wouldn't just fire her. She'd make sure Nia never saw the outside of a jail cell again. But she couldn't leave the jar. It was the only thing that could save the boy in the tower. Nia grabbed a bag of potting soil and slashed it open with her weeding tool, dumping the dark earth over the jar on the table, burying it. Then she grabbed a broom and started sweeping, just as the door kicked open. The beam of a flashlight cut through the dust, blinding her. "Hands where I can see them!" "Please, I was just cleaning." Nia dropped the broom, throwing her hands up to shield her face from the blinding beam of the flashlight. She hunched her shoulders, shrinking her posture, making herself look smaller, harmless, terrified. It was a survival instinct honed by years of navigating spaces where she wasn't welcome. She knew exactly what this security guard needed to see. Not a scientist, not a threat, just the help. The guard kicked the door fully open, the wood splintering slightly against the frame. He was a mountain of a man, his uniform straining at the gut, his hand resting casually, terrifyingly, on the holster at his hip. He didn't lower the light. "Cleaning? In the dark? At 9 p.m.? His voice was a low rumble, thick with suspicion. "Mrs. Victoria! She yelled at me today about the mess," Nia stammered, injecting a tremor into her voice that wasn't entirely fake. "She said if the shed wasn't spotless by morning, she'd dock my pay. I can't afford that, sir." The guard snorted, a sound of derisive amusement. He swept the light around the room, the beam passing inches over the mound of fresh potting soil where the blue jar was buried. Nia held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. If he kicked that pile of dirt, if he saw the glint of blue glass, it was over. Instead, the light landed on her face. He squinted, his eyes narrowing as he took in her dirty coveralls and the sweat on her brow. "Turn out your pockets." Nia moved slowly. She pulled out the lining of her pockets, a crumpled tissue, a few rusty screws, and the $5 bill Victoria had thrown at her earlier. The guard laughed, a cruel, wet sound. "Big spender. All right, get out of here. And if I catch you lurking again, I won't ask questions. I'll just call the cops. They love picking up strays in this neighborhood." "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." Nia grabbed her bag and scrambled out of the shed, keeping her head down until she was well past the tree line. Only when the darkness of the heavy oak trees swallowed her did she allow herself to stop shaking. She leaned against a rough trunk, gasping for air. She had played the fool to save her life, but the anger burning in her chest was sharper than ever. She looked back at the house. The guard was moving away, his flashlight bobbing toward the front gate. The coast was clear. She had the jar buried in the shed, but possession wasn't enough. She needed Julian to understand. She needed to break the conditioning that had held him prisoner for a decade. Nia looked up at the tower. The window on the second floor was a beacon of misery, glowing with a faint, sterile blue light from the medical equipment inside. There was no way to throw a rock without shattering the glass and triggering an alarm. There was no way to shout without waking the house. She looked at the wall beneath his window. A thick, ancient wisteria vine twisted its way up the brickwork, its woody branches thick as a man's arm. It was precarious. It was dangerous. But it was a ladder. Nia didn't hesitate. She gripped the vine, the rough bark biting into her palms, and began to climb. Every inch was a battle. Leaves rustled loudly in the night air. Her boots slipped on the dew-slicked bricks. Twice, a dead branch snapped under her weight with a sickening crack, freezing her in place, waiting for a shout that never came. By the time she reached the stone ledge of Julian's window, her muscles were screaming and her hands were bleeding. She pulled herself up, crouching on the narrow sill, pressing her body flat against the cold stone to avoid the security sensors that surely lined the roof. She peered through the glass. The room inside was like a hospital suite designed by a madman. Everything was white. White sheets, white walls, white machines humming rhythmically. And there, sitting on the edge of the bed, was Julian. He wasn't sleeping. He was staring at his hands, his pale skin glistening with a fresh coat of the cream. He looked like a porcelain doll that had been varnished. He was scratching his arm, a slow, rhythmic motion that left angry red welts. He was in pain. Even now, in the safety of the dark, his skin was burning. Nia reached into her pocket and pulled out a black grease marker, the kind used for labeling plastic plant pots. It was waterproof and thick. She took a deep breath, praying he wouldn't scream, and tapped lightly on the glass. Tap, tap. Julian jumped as if he'd been shot. He spun around, his eyes wide with horror, scanning the darkness. When he saw the silhouette of a person crouched on his windowsill, he opened his mouth to scream. Nia pressed her palm flat against the glass. Stop. Something in her gesture, or perhaps the sheer absurdity of a gardener clinging to the second-story wall, made him pause. The scream died in his throat. He crept closer, trembling, clutching his blanket like a shield. Nia uncapped the marker. She had to write backwards for him to read it. She focused, her hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. C-R-E-A-M. The marker squeaked against the glass. Julian watched, mesmerized. Equals. P-O-I-S-O-N. Nia moved her hand away. The black letters hung in the air between them, casting a shadow onto the white floor of his room. C-RAM equals poison. Julian read it. He shook his head violently, backing away. He pointed to the sun lamp in the corner, then to his skin, mouthing the words, sun, allergy. Nia shook her head. She wrote again, faster this time. Trust the pain. She pointed to his arm. The arm he had been scratching. Then she pointed to the jar on his nightstand. The blue jar that matched the one buried in the shed. Wipe it off. Julian looked at the message. Then he looked at Nia. For the first time, he really looked at her. He saw the sweat on her face, the dirt on her cheek, the fierce, desperate intensity in her dark eyes. This wasn't the face of a monster. It was the face of someone risking their life to tell him a truth he was too terrified to believe. He looked down at his arm. The cream felt heavy, suffocating. It tingled with that familiar, stinging heat he had been told was protection. Slowly, with a trembling hand, Julian reached for a tissue from the bedside table. He looked at Nia one last time. She nodded, pressing her hand against the glass again in solidarity. Julian wiped a patch of cream off his forearm. He waited. He expected the air to burn him. He expected the skin to blister without its shield. But as the seconds ticked by, the stinging stopped. The redness began to fade. For the first time in 10 years, a patch of his skin felt cool. His eyes widened. He looked at the tissue, stained with the greasy white substance, and then at the clean, pale skin underneath. He gasped, a sound that carried through the glass. Nia slumped against the window frame, relief washing over her. He knew. But before Julian could move, before he could unlock the window, the heavy oak door to his bedroom flew open. Victoria stood there. She wasn't wearing her public mask of benevolence. She was wearing a silk dressing gown, and her face was a mask of cold, calculated fury. She didn't look at Julian. She looked straight past him, straight at the window, straight at Naya. She didn't scream. She didn't call the guards. She smiled. A terrifying, triumphant smile. She raised a walkie-talkie to her lips. "We have an intruder. Level 2 force authorized. Bring the dogs." Gravity took over. Nia didn't climb down, she fell, the ancient Wisteria tearing away from the brick with a sound like ripping canvas. She hit the damp earth with a bone-jarring thud, the impact driving the air from her lungs. Above her, the window slammed shut. Then, the sound that freezes blood. The rhythmic, wet snarl of Dobermans being released from their kennels. Run. Nia scrambled to her feet, ignoring the sharp pain in her ankle. The manicured garden, usually so peaceful, transformed into a gauntlet of shadows. Behind her, the heavy thud of paws on grass grew louder, closer. She could hear the snap of jaws, the heavy panting of beasts trained to tear flesh. She sprinted toward the perimeter wall, her boots slipping on the wet grass. The service gate was too far. The wall was her only chance. It was 8 feet of solid stone covered in ivy. A hot breath grazed her calf. A set of teeth snapped shut on the hem of her coveralls, jerking her backward. Naya didn't scream. She kicked back, hard, her heavy work boot connecting with a wet snout. The dog yelped and let go. She launched herself at the wall, her fingers clawing into the ivy. She scrambled up, scraping her knees raw against the stone, just as a second dog leaped, its jaws clamping onto the empty air inches below her heel. She rolled over the top and dropped onto the concrete sidewalk of the public street. Safe. She lay there for a moment, staring up at the indifferent stars, her chest heaving, listening to the frustrated barking on the other side of the wall. She was bleeding. She was exhausted, but she was alive. And she had seen the truth on Julian's arm. Inside the tower, the silence was worse than the barking. Victoria stood by the bed, her breathing perfectly even. She didn't look at the window where Naya had been. She looked at Julian. Julian was huddled against the headboard, clutching his arm, the arm where he had wiped off the cream. He held it out like a shield, or perhaps an offering. "Look," he whispered, his voice trembling. It doesn't hurt, Mother. It feels cold." Victoria's eyes narrowed. She didn't look at the miraculous patch of pale, healthy skin. She looked at it like it was an infection. She walked to the bathroom and came back with a warm, wet towel. She sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under her weight. "That woman," Victoria said softly, her voice dripping with fake pity. "She is dangerous, Julian. She is dirty. Did you see her? Crawling in the mud like an animal. She carries diseases. She carries lies. She put a spell on you, darling. A voodoo trick to make you doubt me." I don't think so," Julian stammered, but his resolve was crumbling under her gaze. Victoria grabbed his arm. Her grip was iron tight beneath the soft cotton gloves. She began to scrub the clean patch of skin with the towel, rubbing hard, rubbing until the skin turned angry and red from the friction. "See?" she hissed. "It's burning already. The infection is spreading because you took off your medicine. You foolish, ungrateful boy." She let go of his arm and reached for the nightstand. She picked up a syringe filled with a clear, viscous liquid. A sedative. "No!" Julian whimpered, shrinking back. "Shh." Victoria uncapped the needle. "This will help you sleep. When you wake up, the bad woman will be gone. And we will put a fresh coat of cream on you, a thick one, to keep you safe." She plunged the needle into his shoulder. Julian gasped, his eyes rolling back. As the darkness took him, the last thing he saw was his mother opening a fresh blue jar, the smell of bergamot filling the room like toxic perfume. An hour later, Nia stood in front of a peeling green door in the crumbling district of East Side. Rain had started to fall, mixing with the dirt on her face to form muddy streaks. This was the address she had found on an old prescription bottle inside the medical waste bag she raided earlier. Dr. Eris Thorne. She hammered on the door. "Go away," a voice shouted from inside, slurred, angry. "I don't have any drugs." "Dr. Thorne!" Nia shouted back, pressing her face to the wood. I'm not an addict. I'm a gardener. And I know about the blue jar. Silence. Then, the sound of a heavy deadbolt sliding back. The door opened a crack, held by a chain. A single bloodshot eye peered out. Dr. Eris Thorne looked like a man who had been chewed up and spat out by life. Unshaven, smelling of cheap whiskey, wearing a stained undershirt. "What did you say?" he rasped. "The cream," Nia said, holding up her phone. On the screen was a photo she had snapped in the shed before the guard came, the ingredients list on the back of the jar. Concentrated sorrelin, bergamot essence. Victoria is poisoning him, and I know you signed the original diagnosis 10 years ago. The color drained from Thorne's already pale face. He fumbled with the chain, his hands shaking, and opened the door. "Get in, now, before they see you." The apartment was a shrine to a ruined career. Stacks of medical journals used as coasters, dirty dishes, and shadows. Thorne paced the small room, running a hand through his thinning hair. "I had no choice," he muttered, pouring himself a drink with a trembling hand. 10 years ago, the boy had a mild rash. A sun sensitivity, sure, but manageable with sunscreen. Then she came, the stepmother. He turned to Nia, his eyes haunted. She offered to donate a new wing to the hospital. All I had to do was exaggerate, just a little. Diagnose a rare genetic photoallergy. I didn't know she would turn it into a prison sentence. When I tried to speak up, she destroyed me, revoked my license, bankrupted me. He slumped onto a torn sofa. "You can't fight her, girl. She owns the police. She owns the media. She owns the truth." Nia stepped forward. She didn't look defeated. She looked furious. "She doesn't own the sun," Nia said. She pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket. The schedule for the inheritance ceremony. "Tomorrow at noon. Julian has to sign the papers to transfer the company to her control. It's an outdoor ceremony. She's going to roll him out in a UV-protected glass box like a museum exhibit." "So?" Thorne shrugged. "So," Nia said, her voice hard as diamond. "I'm going to break that box. But I need you to be there. I need a doctor to testify that the skin under that cream is healthy." Thorne laughed, a bitter barking sound. "Break the box? You're a gardener. You'll be shot before you get within 50 feet of the stage." Nia walked over to the window, looking at the rain falling on the city. "I am a gardener," she whispered, "and I know how to make things grow. But I also know how to make things wither." She turned back to him. "I don't need a weapon, doctor. I just need to change the medicine." The great lawn of the estate looked less like a garden and more like a sacrificial altar. Rows of white Chiavari chairs sat baking under the ruthless noon sun, occupied by the city's elite. They fanned themselves with programs printed on heavy cream cardstock, whispering behind manicured hands. At the center of the stage stood the main attraction. A hermetically sealed glass enclosure, tinted dark like a limousine window. Inside sat Julian. He looked small in the oversized velvet armchair. His skin was pale, almost translucent, slick with a fresh layer of the gel. His eyes were glazed, the pupils blown wide from the sedative. He stared out at the distorted shapes of the audience, his chest rising and falling in shallow, terrified gasps. He was a prince in a tower, waiting to sign away his kingdom. Nia adjusted the collar of her catering uniform. It was stiff, polyester, and 2 sizes too big, but it rendered her invisible. To the guests, she was just another pair of hands holding a tray of champagne. To security, she was just staff. She moved through the crowd, her eyes locked on the small medical station set up behind the stage. That was where the nurse, the gatekeeper, stood guard over the supply of medicine. On the white tablecloth of the medical station sat the blue jar. The fresh one. The one filled with the toxic accelerant destined to be applied to Julian right before he signed the papers, ensuring he would be in too much pain to read the fine print. Nia patted the pocket of her apron. Inside, heavy against her hip, was an identical blue jar. But this one didn't contain poison. It contained a mixture of aloe, shea butter, and pure, harmless vitamin E cream that Nia had spent the last of her savings mixing in Dr. Thorne's kitchen at 4 a.m. She needed to make the switch. A feedback squeal from the microphone made the crowd wince. Victoria stepped to the podium. She looked radiant, dressed in a suit of pale lavender, her smile tight and practiced. "My stepson Julian is a fighter," she announced, her voice trembling with rehearsed emotion. "For 10 years we have battled this cruel darkness together. Today he steps forward not just as an heir, but as a survivor." Nia seized the moment. As all eyes turned to Victoria, Nia slipped behind the heavy velvet curtains of the stage backdrop. The nurse was distracted, watching her employer on the monitors. Nia moved like a shadow. She reached the table. Her hand hovered over the toxic jar. She grabbed it. In one fluid motion, she slid it into her apron and replaced it with the harmless decoy. Done. The click of glass on the table was softer than a whisper. Nia turned to leave, adrenaline flooding her veins. She had done it. She had saved him. "Stop right there." The voice was cold, sharp, and unmistakably Victoria's. Nia froze. She looked up. Victoria wasn't at the podium anymore. A pre-recorded video was playing on the giant screens, a montage of Julian's childhood photos. The real Victoria was standing 10 feet away, in the wings of the stage, watching Nia with eyes like chips of flint. She knew. She had been waiting. Victoria didn't call for security. She didn't ask what Nia was doing. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a phone, her thumb hovering over the emergency dial. "Officer!" Victoria screamed, her voice suddenly shrill, projecting panic so convincing it made Nia's stomach turn. "Help! She has a weapon! She's attacking my son!" The transformation was terrifying. In a split second, the composed matriarch became the damsel in distress, and Nia, standing there with her dark skin and oversized uniform, was cast as the villain. 2 uniformed police officers, moonlighting as private security, burst through the curtains. They didn't see a catering staff member. They didn't see a scientist. They saw exactly what Victoria wanted them to see. A threat. "Get on the ground! Now!" The first officer drew his taser. The red laser dot danced across Nia's chest. "I didn't do anything," Nia shouted, raising her hands. "I just changed the cream. It's poison! She's poisoning him! She's lying!" Victoria shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at Nia. "Look at her! She's crazy! She broke into our house last night! She's trying to kill him with contaminated chemicals!" The crowd on the lawn began to murmur, standing up to see the commotion. The narrative was setting like concrete. The wealthy white widow protecting her sick son from the disgruntled, dangerous help. Nia looked toward the glass box. Julian was stirring. The shouting had pierced through his sedative haze. He was pressing his face against the glass, trying to see. "Julian!" Nia screamed, desperate to reach him before they silenced her. "The jar on the table is safe! Use it! The one in my pocket is the poison!" "Shut her up!" Victoria commanded. The officer lunged. He didn't use the taser. He used his body weight, slamming Nia into the hard ground. Dust filled her mouth. The impact knocked the wind out of her, and the stolen jar, the toxic one, rolled out of her apron pocket. It spun across the stage floor, coming to a stop at Victoria's feet. "Aha!" Victoria cried, picking it up with a handkerchief. "Evidence." She was trying to switch his medicine with this filth. Nia struggled, her cheek pressed into the dirt, a knee digging into her spine. "No! Check the jar! Test it!" But nobody was listening. The handcuffs clicked tight around her wrists, biting into the skin. "Get her out of here," Victoria ordered, smoothing her lavender suit. "And make sure she is charged with attempted murder." As they hauled Nia to her feet, dragging her away like a sack of refuse, she locked eyes with Julian through the glass. He looked terrified, confused. He looked at the police, then at his mother, then at the jar sitting innocently on the table. The jar Nia had swapped. He was alone. Nia had failed. The system hadn't just beaten her, it had crushed her under its boot. "Wait." The single word came from inside the glass box. It was weak, muffled, but audible. Julian stood up. He wasn't looking at Nia. He was looking at his own hand. In the chaos, he had accidentally brushed against the side of the glass enclosure, the side that was hot from the midday sun. Usually that heat would trigger a panic attack. Usually his skin would start to prickle. But today, he felt nothing but warmth. He looked at the jar on the table, the one Nia had risked her life to place there. The nurse, in a panic to calm him down, had already applied a fresh coat from that very jar onto his hands minutes ago. Julian pushed the heavy glass door. "Don't!" the nurse shouted. Master Julian, the sun! Julian ignored her. He pushed harder. The seal broke with a hiss. The door swung open. The hiss of the hydraulic seal breaking sounded like a gunshot in the silent garden. No! Victoria's scream wasn't maternal concern. It was the shriek of a warden watching an inmate break the bars. She lunged toward the stage, her heels sinking into the soft turf, but she was too late. Julian stepped out. He didn't walk. He stumbled, his legs weak from a decade of confinement. He fell forward, out of the sterile, air-conditioned safety of the glass box, and directly into the path of the relentless, unblocked midday sun. The crowd gasped as one entity, a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the lawn. They waited for the smoke. They waited for the screams. They waited for the young heir's skin to blister and peel as the legend dictated. Julian squeezed his eyes shut, bracing himself. He curled into a ball on the velvet carpet of the stage, his hands covering his head, waiting for the agony. 1 second. 2 seconds. 5. The only thing he felt was the wind. A warm summer breeze that smelled of cut grass and expensive perfume. It brushed against his cheek, carrying the heat of the sun, but it didn't burn. It kissed him. Julian slowly lowered his hands. He opened his eyes. He looked at his arm, the arm that had been covered in Nia's aloe mixture. It was glowing in the sunlight, pale but turning a healthy, rosy pink. Not red, not raw, just human. He looked up at the sun. He blinked, tears streaming down his face, not from pain, but from the sheer, blinding beauty of the light he had feared for a third of his life. He's not burning, a woman in the front row whispered, her voice carrying in the stunned silence. Victoria froze. Her face went ashen, the lavender suit suddenly looking like a costume on a corpse. She looked at the crowd, seeing the confusion turning into suspicion. She looked at the police who had loosened their grip on Nia. She looked at Julian standing there, a living miracle that defied her entire narrative. She had to end this. Now! He's in shock! Victoria screamed, her voice cracking. It's a delayed reaction. His internal organs are cooking. Doctor, get the sedative. Put him back in the box before he dies. She rushed toward Julian, pulling a second syringe from her clutch purse, an emergency dose she kept for incidents. Her eyes were wild, manic. She wasn't trying to save him, she was trying to silence him. Julian! Nia yelled from the ground, spitting dirt. Don't let her touch you! Julian turned. He saw his stepmother charging at him, the needle glinting in the sun. For 10 years, that woman had been his world, his protector, his god. But standing in the light, he finally saw the shadow she cast. He didn't run. He stood his ground. When Victoria reached him, grabbing his wrist to plunge the needle, Julian caught her hand. His grip was weak, but his will was iron. No, mother. He shoved her back. Victoria stumbled, her high heels twisting, and she fell hard onto the stage. The syringe skittered away, rolling off the edge and landing in the grass. You ungrateful brat! Victoria hissed, her mask completely gone. I kept you alive! I sacrificed everything for you! Lies! The voice boomed over the garden's PA system, causing everyone to jump. Dr. Thorne stood at the audio console tent, having shoved the sound technician aside. He held a microphone in one hand and a battered medical file in the other. He looked like a wreck, unshaven, shaking, but his voice was steady. I am Dr. Thorne, he announced, his voice echoing off the mansion walls. 10 years ago, I was paid $50,000 to diagnose Julian with xeroderma pigmentosum, but he never had it. The crowd erupted. Cameras flashed blindingly, turning away from the stage to the disheveled doctor. Victoria scrambled to her feet, pointing at Thorne. He's a drunk! He lost his license! He's working with the black girl to extort us! Arrest them both! But Thorne pressed a button on the console. Play it, he growled. A screech of static cut through the speakers, followed by a voice that everyone recognized. It was clear, crisp, and terrifyingly casual. I don't care if the cream makes his skin peel, doctor. In fact, I prefer it. Pain is a wonderful teacher. If he hurts every time he sees the sun, he'll stay in his room. And if he stays in his room, the board will have no choice but to appoint me as regent. The recording stopped. Silence. Absolute heavy silence. Every eye turned to Victoria. The guests, the press, the police, even the nurse shrank away, trying to disappear into the background. Victoria stood alone on the stage. She opened her mouth to speak, to spin another lie, to claim it was AI, to claim it was a joke. But then she looked at Julian. He was looking at her with a pity that cut deeper than hate. "Why?" he whispered. "Because you were weak!" Victoria screamed, snapping finally. "You were a pathetic, soft little boy who cried over dead flowers. My son, my biological son, was strong. He deserved the empire, not you. I did what I had to do to fix nature's mistake." She realized too late that she had just confessed into a garden full of smartphones broadcasting live to the world. The police officer who had been holding Nia down slowly stood up. He unclipped the handcuffs from Nia's wrists. He looked at her, really looked at her, and muttered a quiet, shame-filled apology. Then he walked toward the stage. "Mrs. Victoria, put your hands behind your back." Victoria looked around wildly. She looked for an ally, a lawyer, a friend. But the elite circle she had cultivated for years had turned their backs, literally. They were shielding their faces, distancing themselves from the monster. As the officer snapped the cuffs on her wrists, the same cold metal that had bound Nia moments ago, Victoria looked at Nia. "You," she spat. "You dirty little weed. I should have crushed you the moment you walked through my gate." Nia rubbed her sore wrists. She walked forward, stepping onto the stage, into the light next to Julian. She looked down at the woman who had tried to bury her. "You forgot one thing about weeds, Victoria," Nia said, her voice calm, amplified by the silence of the garden. "We grow back, and we break concrete." Julian reached out and took Nia's hand. The contrast was stark, his pale, sun-starved fingers interlaced with her dark, earth-stained ones. He raised their joined hands in the air. The applause started slowly. One person, then another, then a roar. It wasn't polite golf claps, it was the thunderous sound of justice. As the police dragged Victoria away, kicking and screaming about her lawyers, Julian turned to Nia. He didn't say a word. He just pulled her into a hug, burying his face in her shoulder, sobbing freely under the warm, beautiful sun. Nia looked over his shoulder at the blue jar sitting on the table, the poison that had been his prison. She reached out and knocked it over. It shattered on the floor, the toxic sludge oozing out, powerless in the light of day. 3 months later, the iron gates of the estate were wide open. The private property signs were gone, replaced by a modest, hand-painted wooden plaque. The Solaris Foundation, Botanical Research and Rehabilitation Center. The silence that once choked the property had been replaced by the sound of children laughing. A group of students from the local inner-city school was running through the great lawn, chasing butterflies, their shoes kicking up dust in the place where a glass prison once stood. In the center of the West Garden, a man was kneeling in the dirt. He wore a tattered t-shirt and denim jeans, stained green at the knees. His skin was no longer the color of bone. It was a warm, golden bronze, dusted with freckles that he wore like medals of honor. Julian wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a streak of mud. He smiled. It was a real smile, one that reached his eyes. He was digging a hole for a new sapling. Next to him, overseeing the operation with a clipboard and a stern, but amused expression, was Nia. She wasn't wearing an oversized catering uniform. She wore a sharp, tailored blazer over her work clothes and a badge that read, Director of Research. "You're digging too shallow," Nia critiqued, tapping the clipboard with a pen. "The roots need room to breathe, Julian, just like people." Julian laughed, leaning on his shovel. "I'm the billionaire financier of this operation, Nia. I can dig however I want." "You're the intern," Nia corrected him, a smirk playing on her lips. "And until you master the pH balance of hydrangeas, you take orders from me." Julian shook his head, still grinning. He looked down at the plant he was burying. It wasn't a rose. It wasn't an orchid. It was a cactus. Tough, resilient, capable of thriving in the harshest heat. And it was planted inside a very specific pot. Nia had saved one fragment of the past. It was the bottom half of a broken blue jar. She had filed down the sharp edges, drilled a hole in the bottom for drainage, and filled it with rich, dark compost. The vessel that had once held poison now cradled life. "Do you think she sees the sun?" Julian asked quietly, his gaze drifting toward the horizon. Nia didn't need to ask who she was. Victoria was currently awaiting trial in a maximum security facility, denied bail. The royal treatment was over. "She sees it through bars," Nia said, her voice firm. "Which is more than she gave you." Julian nodded. He reached out and touched Nia's hand, a casual, comfortable gesture. "Thank you," he whispered, "for seeing me, when everyone else just saw a monster." Nia squeezed his hand. "I didn't see a monster, Julian. I saw a plant growing in the dark. I just turned on the light." She checked her watch. "Lunch break is over, intern. We have a tour group arriving in 10 minutes, and if you faceplant in the mud again, I'm not explaining it to the board." Julian grabbed his shovel, energized. "Aye, aye, boss." As the camera pans up, away from the garden, away from the two friends working side by side, we see the estate from above. The dark shadows of the towers are gone, banished by the midday sun. The house is no longer a fortress. It is a home. And the wisteria vine on the wall, the one Nia tore down in her desperate escape, has already begun to grow back, green and strong, reaching for the sky.